Hello, and welcome to the Superliminal Developer Commentary. I'm Albert, Game Director of Superliminal. Myself and the rest of the team will be popping up every now and then as you play. With subtitles open, you can see who is talking and what their role on the game is.
Our patent-pending Somnosculpt technology provides safe and effective dream therapy while you rest in the comfort of our flagship clinic. Located right next to the secondary overflow parking lot at the University Medical Centre. Somnosculpt will make your dreams come true.
Hi, my name's Chris. I was the producer and designer on Superliminal.
Hi, this is Will O'Neill, and I was the writer on Superliminal.
Okay, so that very beginning of Superliminal is actually one of the last parts we finished. Throughout development, we created so many...
Hey, this is Matt. I did the music and sound. This very first jazz piece in the game is called I Wonder, and if it sounds at all familiar to you, that's because you just heard its melody and chord progression in the Somnosculpt TV jingle back at the start of the game, which I called Smooth Wonder.
Hi, I'm Logan, and I'm level designer on Superliminal. A difference with the main resizing mechanic in this game is how much freedom it gives the player. This puzzle is a good example. In most puzzle games, if you put an object on a button in this scenario, the object doesn't need to be moved anymore. The key to unlock the door...
Hi, my name is Alex, and I perform gameplay programming on Superliminal. When I joined the project, there weren't really any menus except the absolute bare minimum to get the player into the game. And there wasn't any keyboard support either. So the first order of business was to add proper mouse and keyboard support to the title and pause menus. The hardest part was supporting switching between the two on the fly, because you never know when the player is going to do it, and it could lock them out of the game. With that foundation laid, I started working on controllers. To make controllers feel as good as mouse and keyboard, I wrote a bunch of code to modify how controller input is interpreted. For mouse and keyboard, input is more or less one-to-one mapped to player movement. So you move the mouse and the camera turns. In the end, I made it so looking around accelerates the longer the stick is pressed, and behaves differently based on whether you are looking vertically or horizontally, and also while you are holding an object. Probably the biggest change was a quote-unquote auto-lock feature, which draws the focus to a grabbable object as your cursor gets closer to it. All these changes culminated in controllers feeling much more accurate and satisfying.
Please provide a comprehensive, rational explanation in your post-procedural survey. Completed surveys may be...
We had this looping hallway for a while, but it was very nondescript and players got confused on where they were and they would get turned around. So our artist Steve helped mock up some windows. Our core game mechanic is so novel that we immediately drew comparisons to other quasi-sci-fi puzzle games. And since our game is about playing with and subverting expectations, we wanted to lean into that and start the first level with a kind of test chamber aesthetic and immediately break that going forward. Narratively, this space is what Dr. Pierce planned to have his dream therapy program look like before it all went wrong.
Please stand by for polite recognition on your completion of the Somnosculpt orientation. You did it. To maximize the time allotted for your therapeutic journey, please do not delay in proceeding through the final doorway as indicated.
The reason we ended up with this sleep clinic section is because we wanted to convince players that they might have actually woken up from the dream. So we don't have any dreamlike mechanics you can play with until you get to the vending machine.
We want the first moment of people walking into this hallway to feel different.
So my brief for the jazz part of this soundtrack was always to do my best to emulate the iconic solo jazz piano sound of the great Bill Evans. For that, I listened to an album called Alone. My process was to try to compose my own superliminal jazz standards. I fleshed out the first chorus and melody. Later on, I workshopped and recorded with my good friend John Reeves. And I'm so glad I did, because his piano skills are so much better than mine.
Hello, my name is Dr. Glenn Pierce, and I'd like to talk to you about being special. So special, in fact, that we have no idea where you are. But not to worry, we're working on it.
Hi, my name is Ryan, and I was the principal artist on Superliminal. Optical's Pink Hotel Hallway was the first area we nailed down visually and served as a starting point for how we approached the art for the rest of the game. We wanted enough decoration for it to be interesting to the player, yet it couldn't have too much visual noise, or else the player would get lost and overwhelmed. We made interactable objects the complementary color of the surrounding environment, which helped them pop more and feel more important. After we were happy with how this part of the game felt, the rest of the locales came together much quicker, and we required less iteration.
Hopefully, you prefer frequent updates to being reminded that you are completely lost.
Hi, my name is Phil Fortier, and I was the graphics programmer on Superliminal, and I also worked on some of the Easter egg design. So in this
Before you grab the moon in the next room, please notice that it looks quite far away. An interesting fact is that it actually isn't that far at all. But because the moon's position is moving with your position, it seems to be infinitely far away.
You should also find a variety of emergency exit signs that should lead you to them. Will all of this work? Absolutely. Hello, my name is Dr. Glenn Pierce. In the event that this elevator does not wake you up, please don't interact with anything that strikes you as psychologically significant.
This is an automated message for all patients who attempted to use an alternate pathway to access the next phase of Somnasculpt therapy, but who have become trapped in a dream state paradox instead. Your decisions imply a failure of orientation, which reflects negatively on the standard orientation.
So the standard orientation protocol.
An early challenge we had for creating the art for cubism was how to approach the space and make sense of it. We started taking it a bit too literally. For example, how could we make sense of the door being so high up? Why would it be built this way? The solution we arrived at was simply not to make sense of it, because it shouldn't. We created a simple museum aesthetic that wouldn't get in the player's way of experimenting with and enjoying the puzzles. Sometimes, keeping it simple is the way to go.
Between the colorful dream spaces, we have these, what we call back areas. These back areas serve as a backdrop to everything. They are where the dream spaces are built, and also the service hallways in between them. We wanted to give them a colder, darker feel to contrast with other spaces in the game. But we also wanted to keep a man-made feel, as if people were just here moving things, creating these spaces, doing work a second before you arrived.
Yeah, it reminded me a little of Charlie Kaufman's Synecdoche, New York. That idea of building a world inside of another world.
Not all of our interesting perspective moments can be built into puzzles. Some are just great moments that break your expectations. This level interprets a cube in multiple different ways, and even though none of these are difficult puzzles, they all work together to create a whole series of back-to-back surprise moments. It was fun finding the balance of making it feel like someone was messing with you, without making it feel like the cube is sentient.
Hello, my name is Dr. Glenn Pierce, and despite touring the
This level came about because we explored the idea of the game being an anthology of different stories, one story for each level. This level was the horror level, and I immediately knew what it would be about, getting the player to be scared of their own shadow. None of the scare. One aspect we wanted to explore and draw from was movie scene cuts, basically how a match cut in a movie might make sense in a game. This next moment is a good example. Carefully watch the cloud in the distance. You'll see that it cuts to a new scene.
Hello, my name is Dr. Glenn Pierce, and I'd like to talk more about the feelings of worthlessness and self-doubt I mentioned before. You feel this way because you want the kind of happy life you see all around you, the kind you know everyone else is enjoying. And that's exactly why we're here to help.
Warning. You were advised to subject yourself to explosive mental overload by descending into additional dreams, but have now descended
The object
into a dream
used in
within
this
a
puzzle
dream
was
instead,
originally a flashlight,
disorienting yourself
but
even
unfortunately,
further.
because of
You
how
are
the mechanic
responsible
works,
for failing to make
it
this
always
crucial
placed the
distinction.
flashlight at the end of the room, which is not a particularly useful position for a flashlight. We tried a couple of things, but finally decided to switch to an object that could glow from both ends.
Did you know that unintentional multi-dream layering occurs
When
in
I
less than
prototyped this
1%
part,
of
there was going to be a
patients?
shadow
This
of a
correlates
monster on the wall
strongly with the
that turned out to be a bunch
99%
of random
patients
objects
who
when the
are
lights
able to
turned on.
follow simple
The
instructions
shadow
from
always
the
looked
standard
silly though, so
orientation
eventually the
protocol.
reveal became the blood.
Hi there, I'm Steve. I'm the art director of Superliminal.
This room was one of the biggest technical challenges we had in the game.
Originally, this was one huge room, but turning our dynamic lights all on abruptly killed the frame rate, so we ended up chopping the room into smaller areas so we could hide and unhide objects from the player's view once the lights turned back on. This would lessen the amount of objects getting hit by lights at a given time, thus saving on performance.
Yeah, I remember Phil even tried teleporting the player to a completely new room.
We wanted to do a unique alarm clock for each level, but this is the only one that survived that idea.
Part of breaking expectations is changing your definition of an object. A door, which usually keeps people out, becomes a flight of stairs if it is cloned enough times.
Attention, Dr. Pierce requires
Yeah,
you
so
to
this
note the
right-click to
following
return
risks of
sign that I bet you didn't even
exposure.
notice is
Significant
one of the
memory
most
loss,
unread signs in the game.
quantitative and
It comes up
qualitative,
later, and it's also one of the most
hallucinations of
unread signs in the
annoying
game there
objects,
too.
unrealistic beliefs about the lengths of hallways, and other side effects which have not yet been discovered or which cannot be understood.
Let's talk about the smiley face. Because our goal was to break people's expectations, we prototyped a lot of weird moments like these. Some of them didn't.
Aside from the core resizing mechanic, I think cloning the objects is one of the more immediately enjoyable mechanics that we put into the game. When we ran playtests, this one would always have people smiling.
Warning, Dr. Pierce is frantically submitting numerous spelling and grammar mistakes into the standard orientation protocol in a desperate attempt to counsel you. I have no subroutine to correct these errors, but I cannot compromise the integrity of the standard orientation protocol. You will not receive these messages. They would not make sense regardless. Attention. Dr. Pierce continues to input significant
Players may
errors.
notice the
I will
motif of the
interpret
repeating
his
purple
basic
hallway
ideas.
found throughout
Hello,
Clone.
my introductions
We wanted
are
the player to have this
redundant.
feeling
I am a
of,
real
have I been
doctor
here
who went
before?
to doctor school.
This seems pretty familiar,
PR has never
but we
been a
didn't want it to be
mistake.
too
I
easy,
can help
or to
you,
be
but I
100%
also do not
unclear.
know how.
So we introduced differences such as lighting, prop placement, and hallway light.
Names
That way, for most
Pierce,
players,
Dr.
it
Glenn.
was something chewing away.
This room kind of happened by accident. We originally just put a cloud video texture as placeholder as a way to expand on the cloud motif. It ended up working so well and fitting the tone so well that we made this a private theater room in the sleep clinic. It evokes a nostalgic and relaxing but slightly creepy feeling which seemed to fit the game perfectly.
Most recently, and discontinue whatever you were doing immediately prior to that.
The sound effects that probably took the most tweaking were definitely all associated with the resizable objects. For them, I had to make a collision matrix so that the sound of you dropping a box or a cube would smoothly change from its smallest to its largest size and anywhere in between. So to achieve that, there were lots of different layers of the sounds, lots of automated pitch shifting, speeding up, slowing down, lots of crossfading between different layers of the sound, and a lot of trial and error to get it feeling right inside the game.
Hello, my name is Dr. Glenn Pierce. In addition to continuing and discontinuing as mentioned earlier, please also disregard any unsettling experiences that you may have recently had. Everything should have now reverted to being soothing and therapeutic. If this is not the case, you may be receiving this message in error. Hello, my name is Dr. Glenn Pierce, and I'd like to read
This
you
puzzle
my
existed for a
favourite
long time, but it took a while to figure out what the art was going to be because the
worst
bouncy
thing
castle
you can
used to
do
just
is
be a weird
focus on
L-shaped
negativity.
block.
It won't
Eventually we
spare
landed
you
on the
from
pool
cage of
motif
death,
and the bouncy
the pain of
castle and
disease,
added a little
the
bit where you
cruelty
go
of
inside the
time,
vent.
the cold shell of human nature, or the eventual loss of everything you've ever held dear. Whatever you do, don't focus on that.
Because we have portals that you can resize, the player can freely change their own size. This actually created a design problem because you could never predict what size the player was supposed to be. And if we dynamically changed the size of the geometry later on in the level, things could break really easily. So instead, we added these portals.
Changing the player size through portals has a couple of weird side effects when it comes to programming. You have the obvious ones, such as needing to change the player collider, movement speed, jump height, and mantling distance. You have a couple of less obscure ones, such as needing to change the camera's far and near clip planes, so geometry is less likely to clip through your camera as you get smaller. Another interesting one we'll talk about later.
So that's my cat. His name is Finn, and he's a good boy. And we only had a day or two left before finishing the game, and we needed to figure out what kind of posters to put in our elevators. So I decided to have a little bit of fun with it, and this is by far my favorite, of course. The Cardboard Lovers Association also makes a nice little nod to the cardboard dollhouse.
The emergency exit protocol is the shortest lived character in the game, but my heart really goes out to him. Because just like a triangle player in an orchestra, he has precisely one job and he waits patiently for his moment to do it, only of course to have it snatched away just as that moment arrives. I think many people can identify with this feeling.
Error analysis complete. You are exhibiting signs consistent with an increase in fear, hopelessness, and frustration. This is inconceivable, as somnasculpt therapy is proven to correlate with a decrease in these emotions. Hypothesis: patient was improperly oriented. Conclusion: impossible. Reformulating. Improved hypothesis: patient requires additional somnasculpt therapy. Conclusion: emergency exit protocol cannot proceed. Emergency exit protocol has been emergency destroyed. Instruction: continue with somnasculpt therapy indefinitely on an independent basis, as all orientation resources have been exhausted. This concludes your standard orientation protocol. Goodbye.
Hello, my name is Dr. Glenn Pierce. Thank you for completing the Somnasculpt Standard Orientation Protocol. Before you begin the first phase of therapy, I'd like to briefly describe the finite and fragile nature of the dream state.
had all these surprise moments prototyped, and so I wondered what it would feel like if we had a whole level of surprise moments. I wanted it to be fast-paced. The working title for this level was Chase. This is the boss level of the game, basically. It's inspired by the third act of the movie Brazil, how it gets crazier and faster paced over time.
Of course, nothing is more challenging than the difficulty of changing perspective, of fundamentally altering your perceptions in a way that will enable you to face dire, trial-by-fire scenarios with solutions that could not be found otherwise.
The music throughout the game really goes through a significant transformation, but the piano is always there to guide you. Even as the music becomes darker and more electronic, it always has the melody, or at least a really significant role to play. It changes as you progress through the game. I switch to different types of piano, starting out with a piano Bill Evans famously recorded on. Later, switching to a more modern sounding instrument. I double it with prepared piano sounds sometimes. I use felt piano, and gradually more reverbs and delays as the game evolves. But at the heart of each piece is the piano.
Finally, while we respect the unique progress of every patient, you must understand that it is possible to complete...
The original idea for Labyrinth was to explore earlier areas, but with a new spin on them. Sometimes it was a matter of adding new interactive moments to turn things on their head, while for others, we would take existing locales and give them a new lick of paint and set dressing. Something familiar, yet fresh and unexpected.
That instability is perfect for the mood and for general world building too.
So when I joined the project, this infinite elevator sequence wasn't actually infinite. It was just a very large block of, 20 by 10 elevators. And the performance, as a result, wasn't very good. And the illusion could be ruined if you walked all the way to one side. So one of the things I did was actually make it infinite. So there's a much smaller block of real elevators, and the player gets teleported seamlessly by portals on each end. And so the end result is an infinite elevator sequence. You can just go in one direction forever.
Destabilizing dream weight.
So coming up with the way to actually make the portal and a portal make sense for the player was a really tough problem. And we iterated on this for weeks with input from all the different team members. So it was really but it was important to get it right because this is one of the pivotal moments in the game. And then another thing we had to do was figure out how to make the world degrade in a way that fit with the game's look and feel. And one day while prototyping, I just happened to accidentally assign a light map texture to one of the walls in the room. I really liked the way it looked. Light map textures are textures generated by the engine online to help with realistic lighting. So anyway, we ended up using this. So when the world degrades, the shafts of light breaking through walls into the rooms, and that effect is actually driven by a light map texture from one of the other levels. This spatio-temporal moment of wonder is brought to you by the very long but invisible rectangular portals tucked behind these empty windows, looking out into other parts of the level you may soon travel to.
This final level was designed with the idea of removing
Hello.
depth perception
My
entirely.
name is Dr.
All the
Glenn
visuals are
Pierce,
flattened.
And many years ago, I had a dream. I found myself in a place where I understood that each of us begins as nothing, where everything I perceived was shaped by seeing it exactly the way I wanted to. White space. But in white space, I also faced the greatest challenge.
Since the universe that the players inhabit is seemingly created in almost a kit bash way while within Somnosculpt, it was a unique challenge to show the players truly a peek behind the curtains of the system. Blank canvas, a scratch document, and an empty sticky note with some notes, little things creatively interspersed throughout. I think I derived some of the inspiration for what happens when you're playing a VR game and suddenly the game crashes to a totally white space. That feeling of disorientation, even though you understand the world around you is an illusion.
You're well beyond dreaming now, and further out than anyone has ever come back from. But we hope that you won't get discouraged. After all, if this is a place of pure perspective, isn't it also a place where a different point of view could make anything possible? Isn't that why you came here? My name is Dr. Glenn Pierce, and by now you may have realised that all of this has happened exactly the way it was supposed to.
This last section was something that Logan and I worked together on for a really long time. When I first saw it, I had this great feeling for how it could be like a really nice, impactful moment. And so I got this really awe-inspiring, inspirational music to put behind it, and Logan absolutely hated it. I stuck to my guns and asked him to stick with it for a while, play it for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and see how things went. And he ended up totally coming around to my side of thinking. Initially, we were unsure if we went for this kind of pure feeling that it would just be really hokey. And I ended up reading this essay on television written by David Foster Wallace. And it really kind of encouraged me to kind of get over that sort of postmodern, too cool for anything aesthetic, and to just really go gung-ho into sort of rewarding me for ending the game by giving me something really nice.
This level was created early on. I liked the idea of giving the player some time to think about their journey rather than ending the game immediately. I knew film-like cuts would be perfect for revisiting their experience through the game. Chris initially suggested a song for reference, and at first I hated it. I kept listening to it though, and eventually grew to love the song. Matt came up with a track that is even better than the reference material, and it fit perfectly.
Your life will always be a struggle, and you will always have problems. But today, you have the chance to see things differently. Even though it meant facing obstacles that seemed impossible at first, you thought outside the box, and you overcame them. Because you saw things from every angle, you understood them for what they really were. Because you kept moving forward, no matter how far off the path you were told you were headed, or how unexpected it became, you found your way. Few minutes, you'll be back in the real world. And some part of you will say that none of this was real. So how could it have really meant anything? But just like the power of perspective itself, it will have been as real as you believed it to be. All you've got to do is wait up.